Rain hit the city all night. The streets were empty and dark. Cold wind moved between the old apartment buildings. Inside a small room on the 4th floor, Ethan sat alone near the window. A weak yellow light filled the room. He looked tired after another long day at work. The television played quietly in the background, but he was not really watching it. Ethan lived a simple life. He worked at a repair shop during the day and returned home every night to silence. He had no family left in the city and very few friends. Most nights felt exactly the same. Eat dinner, sit quietly, and sleep. Sometimes he wondered if anyone would even notice if he disappeared one day. The thought always made the room feel colder. Outside, thunder shook the sky. Ethan stood up and walked toward the kitchen to make coffee. Then suddenly he heard something strange. A soft knock came from the front door. It was so weak that he almost thought he imagined it. He stopped moving and listened carefully. A second knock came a few seconds later. Slow, careful, almost afraid. Ethan frowned and looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Nobody visited him this late. He slowly walked toward the door. For a moment, he thought about ignoring it. The city had become dangerous during the past few months. Strange crimes had started after aliens first arrived on Earth. Most people avoided opening doors at night now. Another knock came again. This time, Ethan unlocked the door and opened it slightly. The cold wind entered first. Then he saw her. A young alien girl stood in the hallway under the broken light. Her silver hair was wet from the rain. Small drops of blood ran down her arm. She looked weak, tired, and terrified. A dark hood covered most of her face, but Ethan could still see fear in her glowing blue eyes. She held the wall beside her like she could fall at any second. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then the girl finally whispered softly, "Please, I only need one night." Ethan stared at her silently. He had seen aliens before on television and in the city streets, but never this close. She looked different from the others, smaller, softer, less dangerous. Her breathing was uneven, like she had been running for a long time. Ethan noticed burns on her clothes and dirt on her hands. Far away in the city, loud sirens suddenly echoed through the streets. The alien girl quickly looked behind her in fear. Ethan noticed panic filling her face. She stepped back slightly, like she expected him to close the door. Instead, she lowered her eyes and spoke again in a shaking voice. "I can cook, clean. I will stay quiet." The words sounded careful, almost practiced, like she had repeated them many times before. Ethan felt something strange in his chest. She did not sound dangerous. She sounded desperate. Before he could answer, giant lights suddenly appeared outside the apartment window. Bright beams moved across the buildings nearby. A loud robotic voice echoed through the city. "Warning! Dangerous alien fugitive detected. Citizens must report all suspicious activity immediately." The girl froze completely. Ethan slowly looked back at her. Her hands were shaking badly now. She looked like someone hunted by monsters. For one moment, Ethan thought about shutting the door. Helping her could bring serious trouble. Humans already feared aliens enough. If the authorities found her inside his apartment, his life could be destroyed. But then he looked into her frightened eyes again, and he remembered what loneliness felt like. Without speaking, Ethan opened the door wider. The girl looked shocked. "You can come inside," he said quietly. For a second, she did not move, almost like she could not believe him. Then she slowly stepped into the apartment. Water dripped from her clothes onto the floor. Ethan closed the door quickly and locked it. The sounds of sirens still echoed outside. The apartment became silent again. The alien girl stood nervously near the door while Ethan handed her a towel. She accepted it carefully with both hands. Her fingers were cold. Ethan noticed strange glowing marks around her wrist now. The light under her skin moved slowly like flowing energy. His eyes narrowed slightly. The glowing marks suddenly became brighter. The girl's face filled with fear again. Then, without warning, A strange symbol appeared in the air above her wrist for 1 second before disappearing. Ethan stepped back in shock. "What was that?" he asked quietly. The girl looked down at the floor. Then she whispered something that made Ethan's blood run cold. "They found me." The room became completely silent after her words. Rain still hit the windows outside, but inside the apartment, Ethan could only hear his own heartbeat. The strange glowing symbol had disappeared, yet the memory of it stayed in his mind. The alien girl looked terrified now. She held the towel tightly in her shaking hands and avoided looking at him. Ethan slowly moved closer, trying to understand what was happening. "Who found you?" Ethan asked carefully. Ethan and Lyra both froze the moment the sound came from outside the door. Heavy footsteps moved slowly in the hallway. Someone was standing only a few feet away now. Lyra covered her mouth to stop her breathing from making noise. The glowing marks on her wrist became brighter again, filling the dark apartment with faint blue light. Ethan quickly grabbed a blanket and wrapped it around her arm to hide the glow. Then came the knock. It was loud, hard, official. Ethan's heart started beating faster. He looked toward the door, then back at Lyra. She looked completely terrified now. Without wasting another second, Ethan pointed toward the small storage room beside the kitchen. "Hide in there," he whispered. Lyra quickly nodded and disappeared inside the dark storage space. Ethan shut the door carefully, just as another hard knock shook the apartment. "Open immediately," a robotic voice ordered from outside. Ethan took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance. His hands felt cold as he unlocked the door. The moment it opened, 2 armed security officers stood outside with a floating drone beside them. Their black armor reflected the hallway lights, and the red scanner on the drone slowly moved across Ethan's face. "Late-night search operation," one officer said firmly. "A dangerous alien fugitive was detected in this sector." Ethan forced himself to stay calm. "I heard the announcement," he replied, "but I haven't seen anyone." The drone suddenly floated forward, trying to enter the apartment. Ethan stepped sideways casually, blocking part of the entrance. The officer narrowed his eyes slightly. "You live alone?" he asked. "Yes." The officer looked around the room carefully. Everything seemed normal at first. Small apartment, old furniture, half-finished coffee on the table. Nothing suspicious. But then, the drone suddenly stopped moving. Its scanner flashed red. Ethan felt panic rise inside him. The machine slowly turned toward the kitchen area. Inside the storage room, Lyra closed her eyes tightly. She could hear the drone getting closer. The glowing tracker under her skin burned painfully now. She tried to stay quiet, but fear filled every part of her body. "Life form detected," the drone announced coldly. The officers immediately grabbed their weapons. Ethan's mind raced quickly. If they found Lyra now, everything was over. Suddenly, Ethan stepped in front of the drone and raised his voice angrily. "Of course there's another life form," he snapped. "My repair bot is charging in the kitchen." The officers paused. Ethan quickly walked toward the kitchen before they could react. Hidden beside the wall was a small broken service robot he repaired sometimes for extra money. He grabbed it and dragged it into the room carelessly. "This thing barely works," Ethan complained. "Your scanner probably picked up its battery core again." The officers exchanged uncertain looks. The drone rescanned the apartment. This time, the old robot's weak energy signal confused the system. After a few tense seconds, the drone light finally changed from red to yellow. "False reading detected," it announced. Ethan tried not to show relief on his face. One officer still looked suspicious. "If you see anything unusual, report it immediately," he warned. Ethan nodded calmly. "Sure." Finally, the officers turned and walked away. The drone followed them down the hallway. Ethan waited until their footsteps completely disappeared before shutting the door quickly. The moment the lock clicked, Lyra rushed out of the storage room. Her breathing was fast and uneven. Ethan could see tears in her eyes again. "They almost found me," she whispered. Ethan sat down heavily on the couch. His entire body felt weak from stress. "Yeah," he replied quietly. "They did?" For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then Lyra slowly looked at him with confusion. "Why did you protect me?" she asked softly. "Humans usually fear my kind." Ethan leaned back tiredly. "Maybe most do," he answered. "But you don't look dangerous to me." Lyra stared at him silently. No one had spoken to her kindly in a very long time. On her world, fear and power controlled everything. Trust was rare. Kindness was even rarer. Then suddenly the glowing mark on her wrist flashed again. But this time something else happened. A holographic image appeared in the middle of the room. Ethan stood up in shock. It was a star map. Dozens of planets, routes, and strange alien symbols floated in the air above them. At the center of the map, one location glowed brighter than all the others. Lyra's face immediately turned pale. "No," she whispered fearfully. Ethan looked at her carefully. "What is this?" Lyra's voice shook badly as she answered. "It's the reason they will never stop hunting me." The glowing star map floated silently in the middle of Ethan's apartment. Blue light covered the walls while strange alien symbols moved slowly through the air. Ethan stared at the map in complete shock. He had never seen technology like this before. The planets looked real, almost alive, and one bright red point blinked again and again near the center. Lyra quickly stepped forward and tried to shut the hologram down. Her hands shook badly as she touched the glowing symbols. After a few seconds, the map finally disappeared, and darkness returned to the room. But the fear on Lyra's face remained. Ethan looked at her carefully. "What was that?" he asked. Lyra stayed quiet for a moment. Then she slowly sat down on the floor like her strength was disappearing. "It's a navigation map," she whispered. "A hidden route across the galaxy." Ethan frowned. "Why would people hunt you for a map?" Lyra looked up at him with nervous eyes. "Because the place at the end of the route is very important." Before Ethan could ask more questions, a loud explosion suddenly echoed outside the building. The apartment windows shook hard. Both of them quickly ran toward the window. Below them, black armored vehicles filled the street while drones searched every floor with red scanning lights. "They brought hunters," Lyra whispered fearfully. Ethan noticed tall figures stepping out of one of the vehicles. These were not human soldiers. Their dark armor looked heavy and advanced, and glowing weapons hung from their backs. Even from far away, Ethan could feel danger around them. "Who are they?" he asked quietly. Lyra's voice became weak. "Royal trackers." Ethan looked confused. "They work for the Galactic Empire," she explained. "They never fail." One of the hunters suddenly looked up directly toward Ethan's apartment window. Even from the street below, Ethan felt cold fear move through his body. The hunter slowly touched the side of his helmet, speaking to someone through a communicator. Then all the drones outside suddenly turned toward Ethan's building. "They know I'm here," Lyra whispered. The building alarm began ringing loudly. Heavy footsteps echoed through the lower floors as soldiers entered the apartment complex. Ethan's heart started racing again. Everything was happening too fast now. He looked around the small apartment, trying to think of a plan. "We need to leave," he said quickly. Lyra shook her head weakly. "There's nowhere safe." Ethan grabbed his jacket and opened a small cabinet near the kitchen. Inside was an old emergency staircase key used by maintenance workers. "Maybe not," he replied, "but staying here will get us both killed." More explosions echoed outside. The hunters were forcing open apartment doors floor by floor. People screamed somewhere below them. The entire building felt like a war zone now. Lyra suddenly grabbed Ethan's arm. "Why are you still helping me?" she asked desperately. "You barely know me." Ethan paused for a second. Then he answered honestly, "Because nobody should be hunted like this." Lyra looked at him silently. On her world, kindness without reason almost never existed. People only helped when they wanted power, money, or control. But Ethan expected nothing from her. That confused her more than anything else. Suddenly, the lights inside the apartment flickered. Then a cold robotic voice echoed from the hallway outside. "Target located. Prepare for capture." Ethan's face turned pale. A second later, something slammed hard against the apartment door. The metal bent inward from the impact. Lyra stepped back in fear while Ethan grabbed the nearest thing he could use as a weapon, a heavy metal pipe near the kitchen wall. Another powerful ooder hit the door. Cracks spread across the metal instantly. "They're coming in," Ethan whispered. Lyra looked completely terrified now. "If they capture me," she said shakily, "they will kill you too." Ethan tightened his grip on the pipe and stared at the breaking door. Then, for the first time that night, he made a decision he could never take back. "Then we don't let them take you." The apartment door finally exploded inward with a loud crash. Smoke and broken metal filled the room as two royal hunters stepped inside. Their black armor glowed with blue lines, and strange helmets covered their faces completely. Behind them, small attack drones floated silently in the air with red targeting lights. Lyra stepped back in fear while Ethan stood in front of her with nothing but a metal pipe in his hands. One of the hunters raised a weapon toward Ethan immediately. "Move aside, human," the hunter said coldly. "The girl belongs to the Empire." Ethan's hand shook slightly, but he did not move. "She's not an object," he replied. The hunter stared at him silently for a moment. Then the second hunter laughed quietly through his helmet speaker. "A weak human wants to protect her?" he mocked. Pathetic. Suddenly, one of the drones rushed forward at high speed. Ethan reacted instantly and swung the metal pipe with all his strength. The drone smashed into the wall and exploded in sparks. The hunters looked surprised for the first time. They clearly did not expect resistance from an ordinary human. "Run!" Ethan shouted toward Lyra. Lyra hesitated for only a second before both of them rushed toward the emergency staircase near the back hallway. Blaster fire exploded behind them as the hunters opened fire. Pieces of the apartment walls shattered, while alarms screamed throughout the building. Ethan grabbed Lyra's hand and together they ran down the dark stairwell as fast as possible. Below them, terrified residents pushed through the exits, trying to escape the chaos. Outside, the street looked like a battlefield. Military vehicles blocked every road while drones searched the sky above. Ethan realized the hunters had locked down the entire area just for Lyra. "We can't escape," Lyra whispered hopelessly, but Ethan kept moving. He led her through a narrow service tunnel behind the building. Few people knew about the old underground maintenance paths under the city. Ethan had used them years ago during repair jobs. The dark tunnels smelled of dust and oil, but for now they were hidden from the hunters. As they stopped to rest for a moment, Lyra suddenly grabbed her wrist in pain again. The glowing marks spread farther across her arm now. Ethan noticed fear in her eyes unlike before. "What's happening?" he asked. Lyra looked down sadly. "The tracker is fully active now," she whispered. "Soon they will know my exact location." Ethan felt frustration rising inside him. "Then remove it." Lyra slowly shook her head. "It cannot be removed." For a few seconds, silence filled the tunnel. Then Lyra finally looked at Ethan with tears in her eyes. "You should leave me," she said softly. "You already did more than enough." Ethan stared at her quietly. Then he answered with calm certainty. "No." Lyra looked shocked. Ethan sat beside the wall and sighed tiredly. "My whole life," he said slowly, "I thought being human meant being small and powerless in this galaxy. But tonight, I think maybe being human means helping someone even when you're afraid." Lyra's eyes filled with emotion. No one had ever risked their life for her before. Then suddenly, the glowing marks on her wrist flashed brightly one final time. A new hologram appeared above her arm. But this time, Ethan noticed something different. The glowing star map was pointing toward Earth. Lyra's face turned pale immediately. "They're not just hunting me anymore," she whispered. Ethan looked at the hologram carefully. Hundreds of red signals were now moving toward the planet from deep space. "The Empire is coming," Lyra said fearfully. "And if they reach Earth, She could not finish the sentence. Far above the planet, hidden behind the clouds and darkness of space, massive alien warships slowly moved closer toward Earth. And somewhere inside the underground tunnel, one ordinary human realized that his life had just become part of something much bigger than himself.